So recently I've been playing Pantheon Rise of the Fallen, the new early access MMORPG from a small team of developers that takes its influence from classic MMORPGs of yesteryear like EverQuest. I'm also currently playing through WoW Classic on the anniversary servers, but you need a bit of a palate cleanser every now and then, don't you? Sort of like some sorbet between courses. So it is that if a new MMORPG comes out, I will probably want to try it. And I'll be honest, that when I first saw it being talked about and reported about, I wasn't really that interested. Mainly because, let's be honest again, it isn't a looker, is it? Not that I am all about the high fidelity mega graphics or anything, but still. And also, that aforementioned old school theme. But I watched a few vids and decided that, you know what, I will give it a go. It is reasonably priced, and so there was no real barrier to my entry. And when I did get in there and had a play about, I had some thoughts. Now call your jets, cowboys, cowgirls and cowthems, not in a negative way, although stand by because I am going to have a little bit of a moan, don't you worry, but I will, for all the good it fucking does, put a disclaimer right here that I do actually quite like this game. Good lord, let's not have a repeat of Throne and Liberty. You say a game is fine but you didn't personally like it and get descended on by a bunch of smooth-brained pedants who don't understand what a subjective opinion is. If I criticise your game, I'm not criticising you. However, I don't think that is going to be the case here, as from what I have heard and what I have experienced, and for the demographic I think this game is aimed at, I do not think I will get the same kind of heat from the Pantheon community. Don't let me down. First, let's eat our vegetables and I'll talk a bit about my experience with the game. Despite it not totally being my thing as far as MMORPGs go, and despite it not having some of the glitz and glamour of other MMOs I play, it does have a certain charm. The graphics aren't really that good, it has to be said, and I found myself kind of wishing they had lent into a more low poly, simple vibe. But as I'm going to say numerous times in this video, we have to consider the caveat that this game is in early access. It is not finished, not by a long shot. It may be that the graphics will be much better by the time it sees its full release, which I assume, without looking it up, is probably a long way down the road. But graphics ain't everything. Despite being light on content, if you take a look at the website, you'll see there is a fair amount of world building to get your teeth into. Now I kind of just like to absorb the vibes rather than read all the text. Sort of like when I go to a museum and I just stroll about looking at things and not reading the little plaques. So that's what I kind of did here. I just sort of looked at the pictures like a big fat child. Cool, look at that, a fish dude.
You ever drunk Baileys from a shoe?
There is a decent range of races to play, with more being introduced all the time. And there is a decent number of interesting classes to play. As you can see, I sampled most of them, but I liked a few more than others, and one in particular. The straight up warrior was alright, and the blood knight, curse, tank, something thing was decent, but the ranger felt best to me. So I chose a halfling because of their affinity with daggers, as I felt this would go well with the ranger class. Now if you play Pantheon, insert early access caveat here, you will notice that there isn't at this point many options for character creation outside of a few haircuts, and many characters kind of look the same. The halflings literally look like scaled down elf models, which I guess perhaps maybe they are in this world, but whatever. I have said in other videos that I like hunter classes or classes with pets, so I hoped I would get that with the ranger. And you do sort of, but it is way down the line that you can summon animals, and I didn't get anywhere near that. Not at this point. Progress is slow as shit, and once you get to level 5, you start getting punished for dying and will have to find your way back to your corpse to get everything you were carrying, otherwise you will lose it all, sans whatever gear you had equipped. And if you've got a skill problem like me, you're gonna die a lot. But there is a teeny tiny problem. You don't have a map. As I mentioned previously, I have been doing a playthrough of Classic WoW and completing some unfinished business by getting to level 60, something I never did when I was a teenager when I first played the game when it released. Go and watch the first couple of vids and drop me a like. Oh, and subscribe for more playing games and gobbing off about them and other stuff. Cheers mate, you're a good sort. Anyway, when I started playing Classic, I was irritated by the fact that there wasn't an arrow on the minimap to show me where to go next. I came from retail, so was babied by the quality of life features that had been added since its release, and I found it hard to adjust. But here, I don't even have a fucking map at all. With WoW Classic, I did get used to it. I almost think that I actually prefer it now, but I can tell you I will never come around to this. And I'll say that I want to explore your world. I just feel like I can't, as I will never find my way back. I'm literally worried to leave the fucking path lest some bug ganks me and I die alone in a fucking pile of grass, never to be found again. Anyway, let's insert another caveat, as maybe a map will be added at some point, but I have a feeling that it won't, as looking at some of the reviews on Steam, the community are all pretty hot on it as it is. Sentiments around not holding your hand, etc. I am happy that people like it, but this is the biggest point of friction for me. I'd like it if perhaps you had to use a skill to map the area, like cartography or something, and you could buy or create maps yourself that you could then sell, but again, some people like its absence, and I've got a feeling that's how it's going to stay. Look, this isn't an in-depth review or anything, so I will just say that some environments are pretty nice, like the forest. Some, to my mind, are shit, like the cave. I just really couldn't get down with that one at all. And these are just the starting areas, so there may be way more to come. But the treehouse seemed to have all the various vendors and trainers available and easy to find, whereas the cave seemed spread out and awkward and difficult to navigate. Again, that might be a skill issue, but it is just my opinion. But while it sounds like I'm just sort of hating on this game, with its janky, weird, scuffed nonsense like characters continually levitating up in the air or gaps in the fucking floor, which is purely an aesthetic thing, but it does kind of spoil the immersion, or you just running through the forest and suddenly you just start swimming through the air. Or just swimming in general for that matter. Caveat, 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 and another caveat. But I do actually quite like it for the following reasons. I think that the combat feels pretty good actually for the most part, and I think there is an interesting mix of classes and races. Let's be fair, that is one of the main elements of the game that you're going to play, the combat, and it is decent. I like the idea of how the support classes will work and the slight step away from the holy trinity of tank, DPS and heal, and I like, in theory, although I haven't experienced it, the slower pacing of how a group approaches a dungeon, which sounds to my mind more like how you would approach a dungeon in a tabletop setting, slowly prepping and probing your way through cautiously as a group, using everyone's specialities room by room. That sounds cool, and maybe one day I will experience it. But what I like the most about this game is that it is developed by a small team for a smaller audience, and unapologetically so. It lends it a feel of authenticity and of honesty, and I like that. I spent years playing in hardcore bands and listening to punk, and I am always attracted to the concept of DIY. Now, obviously, we are not talking about anything like, say, the early days of Discord Records, where Ian McKay et al. Were sitting in some garage sticking record sleeves together and mailing out demos, but it is that smaller operation which appeals to me. Sure, the development team is made up of some industry veterans that have worked on classic titles in the past, but just like a DIY punk outfit toiling in their garage, they are doing it for the passion, to make the game that they want to make for the people that want them to make it, undiluted by the pressures of some fucking hack marketing twat who is only looking at figures on a spreadsheet or what is trending. And this is in direct opposition to the industry at present, who have disappeared so far up their own arses, so swollen and filled with the poisonous pus of capitalism and the eternal folly of trying to make the line go up, that they can no longer see sense. Sure, the developers of Pantheon have said in interviews that they would like to appeal to a modern MMO players as well as the old heads who they are primarily aiming at, but if you are making a game as focused as this, as bespoke to a certain community, then let's be honest, you are definitely not expecting to break any sales records or top any charts. Realistic expectations and being happy with what you have. Unlike recent comments from EA, who, in a stunning display of not getting it or their audience, predictably came to the conclusion that it wasn't just that Dragon Age the Veilguard was just a perfectly average game that performed modestly, it was actually a failure because it only sold 1 million copies or so. Perhaps if they hadn't fucked around with BioWare and the development wasn't continually stalled and dragged out over 10 years, those million sales might have just been a reasonable profit. But toing and throwing on to live service or not to live service ballooned development costs, and it cost them. What's wrong with just making a modest game? Not everything has to be a blockbuster. And if anyone starts crying about wokeness, then I'm sorry, but you just haven't thought about it enough, or don't have the emotional capacity, compassion and nuanced mind to think about it in the first place, or you are just so far down your echo chamber that you can't hear me and I can't be bothered to shout that loud. As I've said before, there are more people who either support or are indifferent to what people call wokeness than there are against it. It's just the people who don't like it cry the loudest. If you are banging on about woke still, then I don't know what to tell you. You have been sold a lie by people who benefit from your eyes being on someone else and not them. Anyway, back to EA and many other companies to boot, they just can't help themselves. They blame the fact that it didn't have live services in it for it underperforming. Insert heavy air quotes. So fucking swollen and hard is their big veiny boner for the mere concept of a live service that they can't think of anything else, and they just continually jack their painful raw dicks at the concept. Like fucking feckless horny monkeys. Kinda weird that the solution they come to is the very thing that they are desperate to implement. Funny that. Here's an idea: don't go around buying studios like BioWare in the first place. Leave them the fuck alone to make RPGs, and EA should just fuck off and make their yearly version of FC or whatever other sports game. That is what really makes them the money. Fucking striping up kids for the Ultimate Team packs or whatever. Why do companies like BioWare end up under the arm of large companies like EA anyway? I know lots of people are probably going to tell me about money and how much it costs to create games and that, and yeah, sure, that is true. Although what I would say is that when people talk about how much games cost to make, not many people seem to be talking about shareholder profits. Perhaps those guys should take a bit less, huh? Insert something here about pigs flying. But the main reason to me why a perfectly good company gets hoovered up and neglected is capitalism and its inevitable ability to create monopolies. These fucking pricks have so much money that they may as well just throw some down on a smaller game studio or even a bigger game studio. We want one of those, so let's just keep chasing the possibility of profits even if that isn't really our niche, and if it fails by our own fucking demented standards, we'll just cut jobs, merge the studio or close it down altogether, and then we'll boost our share price when our costs go down because we have just cast real people to the wind without a second thought. All for what I see as a very expensive gamble, because we've just got to make that line go up. We can't sit back and just sit on our pile of gold and be happy. We have to continually try to consume more, gain more, never stopping, over and over and over. Here's a question that I continually ask myself about a lot of things in life. Why can't people just be happy with a successful, functioning, modest business? There is a sandwich shop me and my partner go to in East London called Dom's Subs. Fucking great. Go there if you are near Bethnal Green or Hackney. They have like 2 locations I think and do the occasional bit of catering or event work, but in general they operate at a level where they can employ a small amount of people they need, create quality produce, always have a fucking queue outside the shop, and probably have a good work life and make a good amount of money doing it. Honest, realistic expectations, satisfied with what they have. No greed, just be content with what is undoubtedly a very successful business. We all know the reason, so say it again with me. Capitalism. So in a world of endless greed, in a lopsided economic system, you're damn right I'm gonna support the indie developers, especially ones who are taking on such an ambitious project as an MMORPG. And sure, I am not the biggest fan of the game itself, it kind of annoys me and frustrates me, but I can see and feel the potential within. And just like when you go to see a band perform live that isn't really your type of music, but they do it well and you can appreciate the craft or the passion. That is how I kind of feel about Pantheon. I am glad I spent money on this game and supported it. The same reason I threw down the 20 quid on Project Gorgon, and the same reason I'll be keeping an eye on Monsters and Memories and giving them some money when that comes to a point where I can pay and play it. In a world of giant companies churning out cynical cash grabs that exploit a captured player base in their pursuit of making the line go up, I'll root for the little guys. And sure, these games may well have cash shops or other monetary practices, but sadly, this is the environment they have to exist in, and these things cost money to produce, as we discussed above. The fish doesn't get to opt out of the fishbowl. But what you do get for your investment in these smaller projects is the ability to contribute to yours and other people's shared passion, see something grow, become part of a community with a shared interest, and in many ways I think that has way more value than any AAA game. Reading through the reviews and comments on Steam, there is clearly a passionate player base, however small, who are really enjoying this game in its current state, and I love to see it. But for me, I think I am just not the main target audience for this. As a fun experiment, and as I had been playing Pantheon and WoW Classic and thought I was clearly an expert on these more old school MMORPGs, I downloaded EverQuest and gave that a little go, just to see how that panned out, and to cut a long story short, I fucking hated it. I found it hard to get on with Pantheon at times, but that is a modern game with an old school vibe. And EverQuest is just a step too far. Fucking weird, esoteric bullshit. What the fuck even is this? What is it? Look at it. Fucking meathead. I carried on playing Pantheon for a while, and I got a bit adventurous and wandered too far from the path and got obliterated by a group of elementals, and then I couldn't find my corpse again and lost everything that I'd been farming for about the last 2 hours. And that is when I decided I was done. So I took myself up to the top of the treehouse, and in a symbolic, ritualistic gesture to the gods of indie MMOs, I threw myself to my death. And then fittingly, my corpse levitated 10 feet off the ground, naked, and I didn't regret a thing. So support indie studios, support smaller games, and fuck capitalism.